One of the most popular grinders that we use, and that is probably the most popular grinder in Australia, is the Mazza grinder. This is the Robur E. The E stands for electronic. I thought I'd take the opportunity today to go through how it operates and also how to make some of the adjustments that you need to make. We'll start with a little bit of troubleshooting. There's a gate here that opens and closes to allow beans into the grinding chamber. If it's closed, there's no beans going in there, and consequently, there will be no coffee coming out. So always make sure the gate is open for the grinder to grind the beans. Another thing that you may see happen, there are some red numbers on here. This is a counter. If these lights aren't on, it's usually because there's a little pin at the back that attaches the hopper to the grinder. When the hopper is not sat properly in there, it doesn't register and the grinder will no longer operate. If you have a green light down here and no red lights, then usually all you got to do is pop that on and the red lights will come back on. Make sure that this is screwed down nice and tight at the back, holds the hopper to the grinder so it won't fall off, but it also engages that safety switch. That means that the grinder knows there is a hopper attached. While we're talking about the green light, if the green light is not on, then you have no power. I know from experience that sometimes grinders are switched off at the wall. For some reason, someone's flicked a switch or pulled a plug out. A little bit like the IT crowd. Let's make sure that we've got power, the green light's on, and then let's make sure that we've got the hopper on top and the red lights are on. Another thing I see a lot in shops is not enough coffee in the grinder. The only thing pushing the beans into the grinder is gravity. So we like to have some weight on top of this to allow the beans to flow nicely down there. If your beans are below this sort of shoulder, then it's going to affect how much coffee is going through the grinder, which is then going to affect the dose that we're going to talk about a bit later. So always make sure you've got plenty of coffee in the hopper. We'll pop another kilo in. And now we're ready to have a look at our dose. For those of you that don't know, the dose is the word we use for how much coffee is coming out when we press the button. We use 21 gram baskets. Our dose that we like is somewhere between 21 and 24 grams. These grinders, although they use the E for electronic, there's no scales in these grinders. So it's just dosing an amount of coffee that is preset up here. The only way to tell how much coffee you've really got in your dose is to measure it on some scales and make sure we zero it. Then we'll take the dose. Currently, we have 22 grams exactly. If we want to change that in any way, I would like to put an extra gram of coffee in there. We have a very, very simple bunch of buttons here. The one called menu is the one you want. We press and hold down the menu button for 3 seconds, and you can see now the screen is flashing. We then select the 2-cup button, and we have a number here. This is 05.60. That means currently the grinder is grinding for 5.6 seconds. If we increase that number to say 5.9 seconds, then we will get more coffee in our dose. If we decrease it, say down to 5.4 seconds, we'll get less coffee in our dose. There's no correlation between the amount of seconds that we choose and the amount of grams of coffee we get. So there's just a little bit of trial and error here. We were on 5.5 or 5.6. I'm going to take it up to 6 seconds, and then I'm going to lock that in by repeating the same process. Press and hold the menu button. The screen will flash, and we'll then return to the counter in the red writing that we had at the start. We can now repeat the process here. Make sure we've zeroed out our vessel. Take a dose. We now have 26 grams. It's a little too much. Press and hold the menu button. The screen will flash. Select the to cut button. Let's take our 6 seconds down to 5.6 is where we started. We've tried 6, so let's go somewhere in the middle. Let's go 5.85. Press and hold the menu button. The screen will flash. It'll return back to the counter. Make sure we have 0 on the scales. We now have 24.5 grams, which I'm happy with because I've yet to adjust the settings up here. So always set your dose first, then we'll look at how fine or coarse our coffee is. Up here is very simple. You have a lock on the left-hand side and you have a little bar that's here to make the adjustment. But you also have a little sticker on these grinders pointing in the direction of coarse and fine. If we want to make it a little bit finer, we undo the lock and make a small, very small, always make lots of small changes, never one big change. We make it a little bit finer, then we lock it back down again. The reason we use a lock is that these grinders have quite a powerful motor inside of them. Each time you press that button, it goes from 0 to about 2,000 revolutions per minute, and there's quite a bit of torque behind that. If you don't lock this down, then you'll get what we call grinder creep, where it'll actually move the setting that you've got it on a little bit each time. So lock it down, and we know that it's going to stay in the same place. The other thing to look out for with settings is to make sure that there's coffee in the chamber. If you're going to make an adjustment here on the grind setting, there's already ground coffee in here, inside the chamber. The chamber holds about 65 grams of coffee, which is roughly 3 doses. So when we make a change on the grind setting, it's not until we remove those first 65 grams that we see the new coffee come through. So the next thing I always do is discard 60 grams of coffee. Now we have purged, so we've removed the ground coffee that was on the previous grind setting, and we have now introduced new coffee into that chamber that is on the new grind setting. Just to recap a little, when you make an adjustment on your dose, the dose will show up on the scales immediately. But when you change the grind setting, you have to then purge the grinder, and I hit the button 3 times to get rid of the old coffee before I then try on my machine to see if my new grind setting is correct or not. If you don't purge, you can make a change, make a shot of coffee, get confused, make another change, make a shot of coffee, get confused again, make another change, and then realize that the 60 grams, the 3 shots that you've just been trying, were not the new coffee. They were the previous settings, not the new settings. You've just got to take your time with grinders, and as I say, there's always a little bit of trial and error. Coffee changes every day, from the day we roast it until the day you've used it all. Each 24 hours, you're dealing with a slightly different coffee. The oxygen and the sunlight, also the temperature, and also the humidity all affect how your grind setting is going to change. Always check the dose first. Don't set the grind setting and then realize that you've set the grind setting to only 18 grams of coffee. So that's my number 1 rule. Always set the dose first, then make the fine adjustments here, finer, coarser, and get it flowing the way that you like. The grinder is really quite a simple piece of kit, and if you just take your time, follow the steps, do it all in the right order. You won't have any problems. The last thing I'll show you is that if you close the gate on here, remove all the coffee from within this chamber. We know now that basically about 3 hits on the button will get rid of all the coffee that's in there. I can hear now that the blades are no longer grinding coffee and that it's empty in here. I can now unscrew the pin at the back, flick the power on the grinder off, and we can remove the hopper. When we do remove the hopper, we can either use a vacuum cleaner to give this a nice little clean, but more importantly, just a little bit of a visual inspection. Just make sure that there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there. We find all sorts of things in there. Pieces of plastic, milk bottle caps. I've even found glass. So anything that's any foreign object that can get in there. That is why grinders have lids. And make sure you keep the lid on the hopper, because anything that's in the cafe can and will find its way into these blades. If you do have a problem where the grinder won't move, usually remove the hopper, suck out in here with the vacuum cleaner, put the hopper back on, and 9 times out of 10 it'll operate again.